So the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa is actually a mistranslation of the original, which is Mila Gurbum. So Mila refers to Milarepa. Gur means song of realization, and bum is the syllable in question here. In this case, it really is an idiomatic expression to mean a collection. So it's the collected songs of realization of Milarepa. But for marketing value, we kept the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa. It sounds a little more fancy, and it also is a familiar title. But so what does the book itself consist of? There's a Tsangnun Heruka is the one who compiled this particular version of Rinpoche's or Milarepa's songs. And he wrote a biography, a shorter biography, which kind of gives an overview of Milarepa's life. And there's been 3 or 4 translations of that already in English. And then there's a section which talks about Milarepa's teachings, how once he attained some level of realization and went out and started teaching other disciples, both non-human spirits, human disciples, people who follow the similar lifestyle that he did as a yogi in the mountains, and then also lay people. So there's a whole gamut of different levels of practitioners, different types of different lifestyles of practitioners, and so the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa it gives an account of Milarepa's interaction with all of these different kinds of disciples. So there's just a huge range of teachings contained within that. It's a somewhat large volume, so 61 chapters. There's a lot of different approaches to how to convey the lineage of the Dharma. So the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa was a project that I was actually asked to do by Dzogchen Pongpa Rinpoche. I would never have dared to start the project on my own without his encouragement. But as I was finishing my studies in Shedra, I had a conversation with Rinpoche talking about what to do next. And he settled on Mila Gurbum, or the 100,000 Songs of Milarepa. So that's how the project began. And for about 2 years, I worked on developing a rough draft, and during that time, I relied a lot on Chang, C.C. Chang, who did the famous translation back in the early '60s. So it was kind of like having a little companion there all along. Even though I translated many things very differently from Chang, it was great to have that support during the process. Shambhala wanted me to have a second person go over and double check all of the translation to make sure it's really an accurate translation. It's a great suggestion. It was very difficult to find anyone who had the time to go through that long of a book. And I got Tyler Dewar was willing to look at a couple chapters, and he gave some excellent feedback in the beginning. And David Karma Chopel in the very beginning portion of the translation, he gave some excellent feedback that I used. Kind of held close. He said that it really needs to be a text that inspires, and that's really what I was aiming for in the end, along with accuracy. But I told Rinpoche, Pongpa Rinpoche, that I wasn't able to find someone to do that double check, and he said, "Okay, well, I'll do it." So he invited me to come visit him in Taiwan. I was attending him, and whenever there was any extra time, we'd pull out the books that were sitting on the table and spend an hour or 2 more, depending on whatever was going on in Rinpoche's schedule that day. And we weren't able to get through the entire text, but we got through all of what I feel are the most important parts. And he went through every word, every single word, just very painstakingly, not painfully, but it was excellent to have his direction. So the translation was very much shaped largely by Rinpoche, who has a great command over the English language, and has spent years working with translators from Tibetan into English, and has done translations of his own. So it's just a really an incredible opportunity to work on that text in such an intimate way with Rinpoche. And then, in addition to that, there were a lot of places in the text that are somewhat obscure. And in addition to looking at some other copies of Tsangnun Heruka's version of the translation, I also looked at previous compilations of Milarepa's songs. So the Black Treasure, the Dzernakma by the 3rd Karmapa Rangjung Dorje, as well as the Buchen Chuni, or the 12 Great Sons, which is attributed to the direct disciples of Milarepa. So a lot of those songs are actually verbatim in many sections, but with slight discrepancies. And so that really, being able to trace those different versions of Milarepa's songs kind of helped triangulate a version that came out in this current translation. And anytime there is doubt about what was actually said in the original, those are all annotated very carefully and put in endnotes. And then as to how this translation, why a new translation, why do something that has already been done before by C.C. Chung, who himself was a great practitioner, a great scholar, had great command of the English language. I'm sure he had help too on the editing, but he was translating in a time when there wasn't really a set lexicon for Buddhists in the West in the English language, and so I think he relied a lot on a vocabulary that's connected with or associated more with the Christian tradition, and so there are certain associations with that vocabulary that I tried to improve upon and rely on some more vocabulary that's been precedented since the time of C.C. Chung. So vocabulary is obviously a big difference between the two translations. And then also in the verse, obviously Milarepa sang in verse. It's very easy to create even 7-line or 7-syllable lines in Tibetan because it's a monosyllabic language. It's very difficult to reproduce that kind of feel in English. But just sort of naturally what my process was to read the Tibetan and sort of feel the rhythm of the Tibetan and see if I couldn't reproduce that rhythm at least somewhat in the English. So what ended up happening, I think, it's not 100% consistent throughout because it's very difficult to keep the accuracy of the language and keep the meter, but I tried to put about 4 feet per line, and all of those feet aren't the same. They're not all 2-syllable feet or 3-syllable feet, but they alternate. But at least I've tried to convey some kind of the rhythm of the original and then using as plain English as possible. So in the appendixes, I put a list of all of the songs that were, at least that are known to have been translated by students of Khenpo Tsutrim Gamtso Rinpoche. And that's Dzogchen Pölen Rinpoche's teacher and a primary guru, and also someone who taught Milarepa songs all over the world to many different people. So he relied on Milarepa's songs as a real tool for conveying the Vajrayana lineage in particular, but all of the profound teachings that are contained in the Buddhist tradition or the Tibetan Buddhist tradition are there. And so I feel like there's a real sort of blessing that's imbued in those songs, those translations. And so I referenced all of them in the back and where they can be found in this new translation. And then all of those songs, those other translations by Khenpo Rinpoche's students can be found online. So you can just do a little search there. So there's an opportunity to go deeper with the songs with a second translation in addition to what's in the book here. The format of the Song of Realization, it's a way of taking in some ways, a vast topic and condensing it down into very simple language, very compact language. So it's a way of taking very profound teachings in a very pithy nugget that can be digested by the students. And it's said that when great masters sing these songs that are usually they're spontaneous. So a teaching is spontaneously coming forth from a teacher's mouth in a relatively short amount of time, that there's for a student who's really ready to receive it, there's a lot of blessing imbued in that short teaching. So there's not only the content in a very short space, but also the blessing that's being conveyed. So every time Milarepa gives a teaching or in the form of a song, there's this sort of transmission that's taking place, and you can see that reflected in the narrative of the stories. That after Milarepa sings this song, then a great realization awakens within the disciple's mind. And that happens over and over and over. And as for the format of the book, it's basically a storybook. So it's very accessible for anyone to pick up and read. There's a really easy to follow narrative. And then these songs are just interspersed within the narrative where Milarepa is interacting with his different disciples.